She didn't scream when they cornered her in the alley. Screaming was for people who believed someone was coming to save them. Instead, she bled. She fought. And she ran. She threw herself through the first unlocked door she found, trading the freezing rain for heavy silence, cigar smoke, and a man sitting in the shadows. She didn't know whose territory she had just violated. She only knew the footsteps were right behind her. "Please," she whispered to the stranger in the dark. "Don't let him find me." The man didn't blink. He just reached out and locked the door. The rain in Chicago didn't wash the streets clean. It just made the grime slick. Chloe tasted copper and exhaust. Her lungs burned, pulling in jagged breaths of freezing October air. Her heel had snapped 3 blocks ago. She'd kicked off both shoes, her nylon-clad feet going numb on the wet asphalt. It didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the heavy, rhythmic thud of boots splashing through the puddles behind her. 3 men. Richard's men. They weren't running at a sprint. They were pacing her, running a deer to exhaustion. She rounded a corner, sliding on wet trash, her shoulder slamming hard into brick. The impact jarred her teeth. The alley was a dead end, walled off by a 10-foot chain-link fence topped with rusted wire. On her right, an unmarked steel door. Heavy. Industrial. No handle, just a keypad and a slight gap at the frame. It looked shut tight. The footsteps grew louder. A whistle cut through the rain. A low, mocking tune. Desperation made her feral. She shoved her bloody fingers into the gap of the door and pulled with everything she had. It shouldn't have opened. It was a door built to keep the world out. But the latch hadn't fully caught. The heavy steel gave way with a groan, and Chloe threw her weight into the opening, slipping inside and letting it slam shut behind her. The silence was immediate. It was heavy, thick with the smell of leather, polished wood, and dark tobacco. She stood in a dimly lit hallway lined with thick velvet wallpaper. The kind of place that muffled sound on purpose. Water dripped from her soaked coat, pooling on the expensive Persian runner beneath her bleeding feet. She leaned against the cold steel of the door, her chest heaving. Then she heard the handle rattle. They had seen her. They were trying the door. They would pry it open. Panic seized her throat. She pushed off the door and stumbled down the hallway, her vision blurred at the edges. She pushed through a set of heavy mahogany double doors at the end of the hall, not caring what was on the other side. It was a vast office. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive desk carved from dark oak. Only one lamp burned in the corner, casting long, sharp shadows across the room. And sitting in a high-backed leather chair, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, was a man. He didn't startle when she burst in. He didn't drop his glass. He didn't even sit up straight. He just turned his head, his dark eyes locking onto hers with the cold, detached interest of a biologist observing a strange new insect. He wore a tailored charcoal suit. His tie was loosened. He looked entirely out of place in the violence of her night, completely untouched by the chaos of the city outside. "You're bleeding on my rug," he said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone. No anger, just a statement of fact. Chloe couldn't find her voice. She looked back over her shoulder at the heavy mahogany doors. She could hear them now, the muffled shouts from the alley, the heavy thud against the exterior steel door. They were going to get in. She looked back at the man. Gabriel Costa. She didn't know his name yet, didn't know he owned half the real estate and all the vice in the South Side. She only saw the sheer, unbothered power radiating from him. She stumbled forward. Her knees gave out, and she caught herself on the edge of his massive desk. The wood was cool against her palms. "Please," she rasped. Her voice was cracked, broken. She looked up at him, the tears she had refused to shed finally mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "Please don't let him find me." Gabriel stared at her. He took a slow sip of his bourbon. The ice clinked against the crystal. The sound was deafening in the quiet room. Down the hall, there was a loud crash. The steel door had given way. Heavy footsteps pounded against the velvet floorboards. Gabriel set his glass down. He stood up. He was tall, moving with a predatory grace that made Chloe's breath hitch. He walked around the desk, his expensive shoes making absolutely no sound. He stopped right in front of her. She could smell sandalwood and expensive liquor. He didn't look at her face. He looked at the door. He reached out, his large hand brushing past her trembling shoulder, and pressed a small, hidden button under the lip of the desk. A heavy metallic clack echoed through the room, the deadbolts on the mahogany doors sliding into place. "Get under the desk," Gabriel said. Chloe didn't hesitate. She folded her battered body into the dark hollow beneath the heavy oak, pulling her knees to her chest, holding her breath. Seconds later, someone pounded on the office doors. "Open up!" A voice barked from the hallway. It was Thomas, Richard's right hand, a man who enjoyed breaking bones a little too much. From her cramped space beneath the desk, Chloe pressed her hands over her mouth to stifle her own ragged breathing. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she was sure the men outside could hear it. Gabriel didn't raise his voice. He didn't move towards the door. He simply stood in the center of the room, straightening his cuffs. "You have exactly 3 seconds," Gabriel said, his tone conversational, "to realize whose door you are knocking on, and then you have 5 seconds to leave my building before I have my men remove your heads." Silence stretched in the hallway. The pounding stopped. "We're looking for a woman." Thomas's voice came back, though the barking authority was suddenly absent, replaced by a nervous hesitation. "She stole something from our boss. We tracked her to this alley. We saw her come in." "I see a lot of things," Gabriel replied, smoothly. "Right now I see a scuffed floor in my private hallway. I see a broken lock on my back door. What I do not see is a reason to let you live if you speak to me again." Chloe squeezed her eyes shut. She knew Thomas. She knew he was armed. She knew he had 2 other men with him. But the sheer absolute certainty in Gabriel's voice was terrifying. It wasn't a threat. It was a guarantee. "Mr. Costa," Thomas said, his voice dropping an octave, recognizing the name, recognizing the territory he had blundered into. "Apologies. We didn't realize this was your establishment. But the girl—" "The girl!" Gabriel interrupted, his voice dropping to a near whisper that somehow carried perfectly through the heavy wood, "is a ghost. If you are still standing in my hallway when I finish this sentence, you will be too." Nobody breathed. The silence was agonizing. Chloe waited for the gunfire. She waited for the splintering of wood. Instead, she heard a slow, shuffling step backward. Then another. "We're leaving," Thomas said quickly. "Apologies for the intrusion, Mr. Costa." The hurried footsteps retreated down the hall. The metallic scrape of the broken back door being pulled shut echoed faintly. Then, nothing but the steady drumming of the rain against the window pane. Chloe remained paralyzed under the desk. She was shivering violently now, the adrenaline draining from her system, leaving only the cold and the pain. A pair of polished black Oxfords appeared in her line of sight. "You can come out now," Gabriel said. She uncurled her stiff limbs, wincing as her bruised ribs protested. She pulled herself up, using the edge of the desk, refusing to meet his eyes right away. When she finally looked at him, he was leaning against the bookshelf, arms crossed, studying her. He wasn't looking at her with pity. He was assessing damage, calculating liability. "You're a mess," he said. "I'm alive," she fired back, her voice shaking but her chin lifted. Gabriel's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement. "For the moment, who is he?" "Who?" "The man you begged me to hide you from." "Richard," she said. The name tasted like ash in her mouth. Gabriel frowned slightly, a faint line appearing between his dark brows. "Richard Hayes, the mid-level loan shark operating out of the West Side?" Chloe nodded. Gabriel scoffed softly, shaking his head. He walked over to a small mahogany cabinet and pulled out a fresh glass, pouring a measure of bourbon. He held it out to her. She stared at it. then took it with trembling hands. The liquor burned a fiery trail down her throat, settling her violently shaking stomach. "Hayes is a dog," Gabriel said dismissively. "A rabid dog with a bit of money and a bad temper. What did a woman like you do to get 3 of his thugs chasing her through the rain?" "I ran away," Chloe said simply. "Women run away from bad men every day. They don't usually get a hunting party sent after them." Gabriel stepped closer. The proximity was overwhelming. He wasn't touching her, but his presence demanded all the oxygen in the room. "What did you take?" Chloe gripped the glass tighter. She looked down at her bleeding feet, leaving faint red smudges on the expensive rug. "A ledger." Gabriel stopped moving. The casual air vanished completely. His eyes darkened, snapping onto hers with a sharp, dangerous focus. "A ledger," he repeated, the words slow and deliberate. "Flash drive, encrypted, but yes, it's his entire operation. Bribes, dirty cops, politicians on the payroll, everything." "And where is it?" "Safe," Chloe lied. She was a terrible liar, but she had nothing else. Gabriel saw right through it. He reached out, his fingers catching her chin. His touch was warm, firm, and completely uncompromising. He tilted her face up to the dim light, examining a nasty bruise forming along her jawline. "You didn't have time to stash it. You've been running for hours. Your clothes are soaked through. You don't have a bag." His gaze dropped to the deep pockets of her trench coat, then back up to her eyes. "It's on you." Chloe tried to pull her head back, but his grip held firm. Not hurting her, just immovable. "You asked me for sanctuary," Gabriel said softly. "You asked me to lock the door. I did. I kept the dogs out, but nothing in this city is free, Chloe." She hadn't told him her name. The realization hit her like a bucket of ice water. Gabriel released her chin and stepped back, picking up his own drink. "Richard Hayes is a pest. But a pest with a ledger like that becomes a commodity. Hand it over. If I give it to you, I have nothing to bargain with. He'll kill me." "If you don't give it to me," Gabriel said, taking a slow sip of his bourbon, "I unlock the door and call Thomas back." The ultimatum hung in the air, cold and absolute. Chloe stared at Gabriel. She was searching for a bluff, a crack in his armor, a hint of basic human decency. She found none. He wasn't a hero. She had just traded a rabid dog for a quiet, patient wolf. Slowly, her numb fingers fumbled with the buttons of her soaked trench coat. She reached into the inner breast pocket, her knuckles scraping against the damp lining, and pulled out a small silver flash drive. It looked pathetic in her palm. 3 inches of metal and plastic that had cost her 3 broken ribs, a fractured cheekbone, and everything she owned. She held it out. Gabriel didn't snatch it. He took it deliberately, his fingers brushing hers. The drive vanished into his suit pocket. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to a leather sofa in the corner of the room. Chloe didn't argue. Her legs were done holding her up anyway. She sank into the plush leather, wincing as the upholstery pressed against her back. Gabriel walked over to an intercom on his desk. He pressed a button. "Marcus, bring the medkit to my office, and a change of clothes, something small." He released the button before anyone could reply. He walked back to her, standing over her. "You are going to tell me exactly how you got this drive, how long Hayes has known it was missing, and who else he might have called?" "I was his accountant," Chloe said, the words spilling out of her. Exhaustion was breaking down her defenses. "Legitimate stuff, mostly. Front businesses, laundromats, restaurants. But I saw the discrepancies. I started digging. When he realized I knew, he didn't fire me. He moved me into his house, kept me there, said I belonged to him now since I knew his secrets." She swallowed hard, looking at her hands. "I played along, for 6 months. I waited until he was out of town on business, copied the master file from his home safe, and ran. He came back early. His men caught me at the train station. I got away, but they've been chasing me since." Gabriel listened without interrupting. His face was unreadable. "You're a fool," he said finally. Chloe's head snapped up, anger briefly cutting through the fear. "I was a prisoner. You were an amateur, Gabriel corrected, his tone flat. You stole the most valuable thing a paranoid criminal possesses, and your escape plan was public transit. You're lucky you're only bleeding. The heavy mahogany doors clicked and opened. A large man in a tailored suit stepped in. Marcus. He carried a black medical bag and a folded stack of clothes, a black t-shirt and sweatpants. He set them on a side table without a word, gave Chloe a brief, indifferent glance, and walked out, pulling the doors shut behind him. The deadbolts clicked back into place. Gabriel carried the medical bag to the sofa and set it on the coffee table. He unlatched it, pulling out gauze, antiseptic, and medical tape. "Take off the coat," he said. Chloe hesitated. Under the trench coat, she wore a torn silk blouse. It was ruined, ripped at the shoulder where one of Thomas's men had grabbed her. Gabriel noticed her hesitation. "I am not interested in you physically, Chloe. I am interested in keeping you alive long enough to verify this drive. Take the coat off before you catch pneumonia and ruin my upholstery." The blunt pragmatism stung, but it also relaxed her. She peeled the wet, heavy wool off her shoulders, dropping it onto the floor. She shivered in the cold air of the office. Gabriel sat beside her on the sofa. He didn't ask for permission. He poured antiseptic onto a cotton pad and pressed it firmly against a deep cut on her cheekbone. Chloe hissed, flinching backward. Gabriel's hand shot out, gripping the back of her neck to hold her steady. His grip was warm, solid, and immovable. "Hold still." He cleaned the cut with precise, practiced movements. He worked in silence, his focus absolute. Chloe watched his face. Up close, he was intimidatingly handsome. Sharp jaw, straight nose, dark eyes that missed absolutely nothing. There was a small scar cutting through his left eyebrow. A man who had fought his way into this office, not inherited it. "Why didn't you hand me back?" she asked softly, the pain receding into a dull throb. "You have the drive now. You could have let them take me." Gabriel taped a piece of gauze over the cut. He dropped his hand from her neck, reaching for a fresh cotton pad to clean her split lip. "Richard Hayes is a messy amateur. He leaves bodies where they can be found. He beats his employees. He draws attention," Gabriel said, wiping the dried blood from her mouth. "I prefer a quiet city. Hayes is bad for business. This drive gives me the leverage to dismantle his operation without firing a single shot." "And what about me?" Chloe asked, her voice barely a whisper. Gabriel paused. He looked at her mouth, then up to her eyes. The cold detachment in his gaze fractured, just for a second, replaced by something heavier, something predatory, but deeply protective. "You broke into my building," he said softly. "You bled on my floor. You dragged a pack of wild dogs to my doorstep." Chloe held her breath. "You don't exist anymore," Gabriel finished, packing the supplies back into the black bag. "Richard Hayes is going to spend the next week tearing this city apart looking for you. He will torture anyone you know. He will watch the airports, the bus stations, the hospitals." He stood up, towering over her again. "You are going to stay here, in this building. My men will watch the doors. You will not leave. You will not use a phone. You will eat what I give you, and you will sleep where I tell you to. When I have dealt with Hayes, we will discuss your future." Chloe stared up at him. The reality of her situation settled over her like a heavy blanket. She hadn't escaped. She had just found a stronger, smarter warden. "Am I your prisoner now?" she asked. Gabriel looked down at her. He didn't smile. "I prefer the term guest," he said. "The locks on these doors keep them out, but they also keep you in." He turned and walked back to his desk, picking up the silver flash drive. "Put those dry clothes on," Gabriel said, without looking back at her. "Try to get some sleep. The real work starts tomorrow." Chloe sat on the leather sofa, the sound of the rain lashing against the windows. She looked at the heavy deadbolts on the door. She was trapped. But as she watched Gabriel Costa slide the flash drive into his computer, preparing to dismantle the man who had ruined her life, she realized one terrifying truth. For the first time in 6 months, she felt safe. Morning arrived not with sunlight, but with a sterile grey illumination filtering through rain-streaked, bulletproof glass. Chloe woke up with a gasp, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her bruised ribs. She sat up too fast. Pain flared in her side, sharp and breath-stealing, forcing her to double over. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the memory of the alley, the rain, and the running to fade. It didn't. It just settled into a cold knot in her stomach. She opened her eyes and took in her surroundings. She wasn't in Gabriel Costa's office anymore. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, exhaustion had pulled her under. She had fallen asleep on his leather sofa. Now she was in a bed. A massive, king-sized mattress with high thread-count sheets. The room was aggressively minimalist. Slate-grey walls, minimal furniture, no pictures, no personal effects. It looked less like a bedroom and more like a high-end hotel suite designed for a ghost. She threw off the covers. She was still wearing the black t-shirt and sweatpants she'd been given the night before. They smelled like expensive laundry detergent. She walked to the door. Heavy oak. No lock on the inside. She gripped the brass handle and pulled. It didn't budge. She rattled it. Nothing. She was locked in. Panic, familiar and suffocating, clawed at her throat. She backed away from the door, her breathing shallow. Richard had locked her in, too. He had given her a beautiful room, expensive clothes, and a locked door. "I prefer the term guest." Gabriel's voice echoed in her mind. She pressed her palms to her eyes, forcing the panic down. Gabriel wasn't Richard. Gabriel didn't look at her like a possession. He looked at her like a complex math problem, a liability, an asset, but not property. It was a cold comfort, but right now she needed cold. 10 minutes later, the deadbolt clicked. Chloe stood by the window, her back rigid. The door opened. A man stepped inside. Not Gabriel. He was younger, with a shaved head and a boxer's flattened nose. "Mr. Costa wants you in the study," he said. His voice was entirely devoid of inflection. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't smile. "I don't have shoes," Chloe said, pointing to her bare, bandaged feet. The man reached out and dropped a pair of soft grey slippers onto the hardwood floor. "Put them on. Follow me." She slipped them on and followed him out into the hallway. The compound was vast. There were no windows in the corridors, only recessed lighting that cast a perpetual, artificial twilight. It was quiet. Too quiet. A heavily fortified tomb in the middle of Chicago. They reached a set of frosted glass doors. The guard opened one and stepped aside. Chloe walked in. It was a command center. Banks of monitors lined the far wall, displaying security feeds from across the city. Alleys, warehouses, loading docks. Gabriel sat at a large steel desk, staring at a laptop screen. He wore a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and faint, pale scars. He didn't look up when she entered. "Sit," he said. Chloe sat in the chair opposite him. She waited. Gabriel tapped a key on his laptop, and the screen mirrored onto a larger monitor on the wall. It was a massive spreadsheet. Columns of numbers, dates, and routing codes. Richard Hayes's ledger. "You encrypted this," Gabriel said, finally looking at her. The dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept at all. "I did," she said. "It's a triple-layered AES encryption. I had a guy look at it for 3 hours. He got through the first layer and hit a tripwire that nearly wiped the drive." Gabriel leaned back in his chair, resting his chin on his steepled fingers. "Hayes didn't pay you enough to build military-grade firewalls. Where did you learn this?" "I like numbers," Chloe said simply. "They make sense. People don't. When I realized what Richard was doing, I wanted an insurance policy. I built a back door into his network. I copied the files, scrubbed the metadata, and locked it." Gabriel stared at her. The silence stretched. He was evaluating her again, calibrating his understanding of the woman sitting in front of him. "Unlock it," he said, sliding the laptop across the desk. Chloe didn't move. You said we would discuss my future after you dealt with Hayes. If I unlock this now, you have everything you need. You have no reason to keep me alive. Gabriel's expression darkened. He stood up, placing both hands flat on the desk, leaning closer to her. Let me make something perfectly clear, he said, his voice dangerously soft. I do not negotiate with people who bleed on my rugs. I am keeping you alive because letting Hayes kill you is bad for my city's ecosystem. But my patience is not infinite. Unlock the drive, or I will put you in a car and drop you off at Hayes's front door right now. He meant it. There was no bluff. Chloe pulled the laptop toward her. Her hands were shaking slightly. She typed in a string of 42 characters, a mix of letters, numbers, and symbols she had memorized months ago. She hit enter. The screen blinked green. The folders decrypted. She pushed the laptop back. It's open. Gabriel sat down. He didn't say thank you. He just started clicking. For the next hour, the only sound in the room was the rapid clack of his keyboard. Chloe watched him work. He was fast. He cross-referenced names, checked routing numbers, and matched dates with events only he would know about. Hayes is laundering through the docks, Gabriel murmured, almost to himself. Union bosses, that's how he's moving the cash. Look at the tab marked Osprey, Chloe said, leaning forward slightly. Gabriel paused, clicking the tab. A list of wire transfers appeared, all heading to offshore accounts. He's skimming from his own cartel suppliers, Chloe explained, pointing at the screen. He's over-reporting losses and keeping the margin. If his suppliers see those numbers, they won't just kill him, they'll take him apart. Gabriel's eyes widened a fraction. It was the first display of genuine surprise she had seen from him. He looked at the screen, then at her. You didn't just steal his ledger, Gabriel said, a slow, predatory smirk forming on his lips. You stole his death warrant. I told you, Chloe said, her voice steadying. I'm a good accountant. 2 days passed. The routine of the gilded cage settled in. Chloe was given decent food, a change of clothes, and absolute isolation. The guard with the flattened nose, she learned his name was Dominic, escorted her from her room to the study and back. Nothing else. She was allowed to help Gabriel interpret the ledger. It was a bizarre, clinical partnership. They sat in the dim command center for hours, dissecting Richard Hayes's lifeline by line. She learned quickly that Gabriel didn't run a gang. He ran a corporation. His men were disciplined. His operations were quiet. He despised chaos, and Richard Hayes was pure chaos. On the afternoon of the third day, the chaos spilled over. Chloe was sitting on the sofa in the study, reading a book Gabriel had tossed her, when the heavy doors banged open. Dominic rushed in. He looked ruffled, a rare break in his stoic demeanor. Boss, Dominic said, ignoring Chloe. We have a problem. Gabriel didn't look away from his monitors. Report. The nightclub on 4th, the Velvet Lounge. Hayes just sent a crew through the front doors. Broad daylight. They smashed the registers, broke the bottles, and beat the manager half to death. Gabriel stopped typing. The silence in the room became instantly suffocating. Did they take money? Gabriel asked. No, Dominic said. They left a message. Said they know someone who belongs to them is hiding in our territory. Said they're going to burn every front we have until she's returned. Chloe's blood ran cold. She dropped the book. It hit the floor with a loud thud, but neither man looked at her. Hayes was getting desperate. He wasn't just looking for her. He was actively provoking the biggest predator in the city to flush her out. Gabriel slowly stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket. His face was a mask of absolute, terrifying calm. Hayes is acting like a man who doesn't know he's already dead, Gabriel said. He walked over to the steel cabinet in the corner of the room. He unlocked it with a biometric scanner. Inside was an armory. Chloe watched, paralyzed, as Gabriel retrieved a sleek, black, semi-automatic pistol. He checked the magazine, the metallic clack echoing off the hard walls. He slid it into a shoulder holster. What are you going to do? Chloe asked, her voice trembling. Gabriel turned to her. His eyes were flat. Dead. The man who had carefully cleaned her wounds 3 nights ago was gone. This was the warlord. I am going to remind Mr. Hayes why we don't throw stones at glass houses, Gabriel said. You can't just kill him, Chloe said, standing up, ignoring the ache in her ribs. If you kill him now, his cartel suppliers will investigate. They'll trace the missing money to his death, and they'll come looking for the ledger. They'll come looking for you. Gabriel paused. He looked at her, his head tilted slightly. You think I can't handle a cartel? I think you prefer a quiet city. She countered. A war is bad for business. You said it yourself. Gabriel stared at her for a long moment. The tension in his jaw relaxed, just a millimeter. You are surprisingly level-headed for someone who is being hunted, he noted. I've spent 6 months watching men solve problems with bullets. It never works. Use the ledger. Leak the Osprey file to the cartel. Let them handle Richard. Gabriel considered this. He looked at Dominic. Pull the security footage from the club. Find out exactly who was on that crew. But don't touch them yet. I need to make a phone call. He walked back to his desk, pulling a burner phone from his drawer. Dominic? Gabriel said, without looking up. Lock her in a room. Put 2 men on the door. No one gets in or out. Wait, Chloe said, stepping forward. I'm helping you. You did help me, Gabriel said, his tone dismissing her entirely. Now I have to work. Get her out of here. Dominic grabbed her arm. Not brutally, but with enough force to let her know resistance was useless. He pulled her out of the study and marched her down the long, dim hallway. She was locked in her room again. The heavy deadbolt sliding into place felt like a physical blow. For the next 6 hours, Chloe paced the floor. She listened to the muffled silence of the compound. She couldn't hear gunfire, but she could feel the tension vibrating in the walls. Gabriel was moving his chess pieces, and she was just a pawn sitting on the edge of the board, waiting to see if she would be sacrificed. When the door finally opened again, it was past midnight. Gabriel stood in the doorway. He didn't have his suit jacket on. His white shirt was stained with dark, rusty streaks of blood. He didn't look at her. He just walked past her, straight into her bathroom, and turned on the faucet. Chloe stood frozen in the center of the bedroom, watching the bathroom doorway. The sound of running water filled the quiet space. She took a hesitant step forward. Gabriel was leaning over the marble sink. He had stripped off his blood-stained shirt. His back was a map of old violence, faded white lines intersecting with jagged puckers of scar tissue. But that wasn't what was bleeding. A fresh, deep gash ran along his left bicep. It looked like a knife wound. He was clumsily trying to pour hydrogen peroxide over the cut with his right hand, his teeth gritted in a silent snarl. The peroxide foamed white against his skin, washing pink down the drain. You're bleeding, Chloe said softly. Gabriel didn't turn around. Astute observation. She walked into the bathroom. She didn't ask for permission. She reached out and took the brown plastic bottle of peroxide from his rigid grip. He stiffened, his muscles jumping under her knuckles, but he didn't pull away. Sit on the edge of the tub, she ordered. He looked down at her. His eyes were dark, exhausted, and simmering with residual adrenaline. For a second, she thought he was going to snap at her, tell her to get out. Instead, he let out a harsh breath and sat down on the cold porcelain rim. Chloe opened the cabinet under the sink and found a first aid kit. She pulled out gauze, a needle, and surgical thread. You know how to suture? He asked, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. Richard's men didn't always go to the hospital, she said, her tone flat. She ripped open an alcohol swab. This is going to sting. Just do it. She cleaned the edges of the wound. Gabriel didn't flinch. He just stared at the wall over her shoulder, his jaw clenched so tight the muscle jumped rhythmically. Who did this? She asked, threading the needle. One of Hayes's lieutenants, Thomas. Chloe's hand stopped. The needle hovered an inch from his arm. Thomas, is he? He won't be breaking any more locks, Gabriel said coldly. or breathing. The rest of his crew is in a shipping container headed for the bottom of the lake. I sent a message. Chloe swallowed hard. She pushed the needle through his skin. Gabriel hissed, his hand gripping the edge of the tub, his knuckles turning white. I told you to use the ledger, she said, her voice shaking slightly as she pulled the thread tight. I did, Gabriel replied. The file was sent to a cartel proxy 3 hours ago, but Hayes hit my territory. He touched my people. A spreadsheet doesn't answer for that. Blood does. They fell silent. The only sound was the slight pulling of the thread and the slow drip of the faucet. Being this close to him was entirely different than sitting across a desk. He radiated heat. The sharp scent of copper, sweat, and expensive cologne was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. She was stitching up a killer. A man who had just ended lives without hesitation. Why didn't you just look away? Gabriel asked suddenly, his voice quiet, dropping the commanding edge. Chloe tied off a knot and snipped the thread. What? Hayes, Gabriel said, finally looking down at her. His dark eyes locked onto hers, pinning her in place. You had a good job. You were safe. You saw the dirty money. Why not just take your paycheck, buy a nice condo and look the other way? Most people would. Chloe carefully wiped the dried blood from his arm with a damp cloth. Because looking away is how men like him take over, she whispered. I thought if I could get the proof, I could give it to the police. I didn't know the police were on his payroll until it was too late. I was stupid. You weren't stupid. You were naive. There's a difference. He lifted his uninjured hand and caught her wrist, stopping her from pulling away. His thumb brushed over her pulse point. His skin was rough, calloused. You're not naive anymore, Chloe, he murmured. The air between them thickened. The clinical detachment was gone, replaced by a heavy, dangerous gravity. She looked at his mouth. She looked at his eyes. He wasn't pushing her away. He was drawing her in. Suddenly, a sharp electronic trill shattered the quiet. Gabriel's head snapped up. It was the burner phone sitting on the bathroom counter. He let go of her wrist, the warmth leaving her skin instantly. He picked up the phone. It was an unknown number. He hit accept and put it on speaker. Costa, Gabriel said. A heavy, jagged breath crackled through the speaker. You took my ledger? Richard Hayes's voice echoed in the tiled bathroom. It was frantic, unhinged. You killed Thomas, and you took my girl. Chloe stopped breathing. She backed up until her shoulders hit the wall. I have no idea what you're talking about, Richard, Gabriel said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. You must have the wrong number. Don't lie to me! Hayes screamed, the sound distorting the small speaker. I know she's in your compound. I have eyes on the perimeter. The cartel just called me. They want my head. You set me up. Actions have consequences, Gabriel replied coolly. You think you've won? Hayes laughed. It was an ugly, broken sound. You think you're untouchable in our fortress? I don't care about the cartel anymore, Costa. I'm a dead man walking, and a dead man has nothing to lose. I have a dozen men outside your gates with enough C4 to level your block. Send Chloe out right now, or we all burn together. The line went dead. The dial tone echoed in the bathroom, a high, flat pitch that sounded like a flatlining monitor. Gabriel stared at the burner phone in his hand. He didn't throw it. He didn't curse. He simply reached over and pressed the end call button. The silence rushed back in, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was the sharp, pressurized quiet that comes right before a bomb detonates. He looked at Chloe. She was still pressed against the wall, her face entirely drained of color. Get your shoes, Gabriel said. His voice was a calm, mechanical drone. Chloe couldn't move. Her feet felt welded to the floor tiles. He's going to blow up the building. You heard him. He's a dead man. He doesn't care if he dies. Which makes him predictable, Gabriel replied, walking past her into the bedroom. He strode to a digital keypad on the wall near the door and punched in a code. A heavy steel shutter immediately began sliding down over the bedroom window, plunging the room into darkness before the overhead lights flickered on. Dead men only know how to push forward. They don't strategize. They just burn. "I should go out there," she whispered. Gabriel stopped. He turned around, his dark eyes locking onto hers. There was no warmth left in them, just cold, tactical calculus. "And do what?" he asked. "Martyr yourself? You think handing yourself over to a man who just promised to blow up a city block is going to save anyone? If you walk out those doors, he will shoot you in the head to make a point, and then he will detonate the C4 anyway because he has nothing left to go back to. Don't flatter yourself, Chloe. This isn't about you anymore. This is about a dog making a mess on my porch." The brutal honesty stung, but it snapped her out of her panic. She nodded, her breathing shallow but steady. She ran to the edge of the bed and shoved her feet into the grey slippers. A deafening alarm suddenly shattered the air. It wasn't a high-pitched wail, but a low, guttural klaxon that vibrated in her chest. Gabriel grabbed a fresh black shirt from the closet, pulling it over his head, wincing only slightly as the fabric dragged over his fresh stitches. He reached under the mattress and pulled out another handgun, sliding it into the waistband at the small of his back. He opened the bedroom door. Dominic was already running down the hall, holding a matte black assault rifle. "Perimeter breach!" Dominic shouted over the alarm. "Front gate is gone. They used a truck, rammed it straight through the ironwork. We have 8, maybe 10 tangos in the courtyard." "Are they in the building?" Gabriel asked, stepping out into the hall and pulling Chloe behind him. "Not yet. The steel doors are holding, but they're wiring the hinges. They have explosives, boss." "Let them wire it," Gabriel said. "Fall back to the interior choke points, give them the lobby. When they breach, they're going to expect resistance at the door. Give them empty space, funnel them into the grand hallway. The angles there belong to us." Dominic nodded once, a brief, violent grin flashing across his face, and took off down the corridor. Gabriel turned to Chloe. He grabbed her upper arm, his grip firm. "We are going to the basement." "The basement?" she choked out, struggling to keep up with his long strides as he pulled her toward a concealed door at the end of the hall. "If the building collapses, we'll be buried." "The basement," Gabriel corrected, pushing open the heavy fire door to reveal a narrow concrete stairwell, is a reinforced bunker built by a paranoid bootlegger in the 1920s and modernized by me. A tactical nuke would give it a fresh coat of paint. "Move." They descended the stairs rapidly. The concrete walls amplified the sound of the alarm. Chloe's side ached with every step, her broken ribs grinding together in protest, but adrenaline filed the edges off the pain. They reached the bottom. A heavy steel door, resembling a bank vault, stood closed. Gabriel pressed his thumb to a biometric scanner. The heavy locks disengaged with a series of loud, mechanical thuds. He pulled it open and shoved her inside. The room was Spartan. 4 concrete walls, a cot, a pallet of bottled water, and a bank of security monitors that were currently dark. "Sit on the cot," Gabriel commanded. He reached to his shoulder holster and pulled out the sleek, semi-automatic pistol. He clicked the safety off and held it out to her. "Grip first." Chloe stared at the weapon. She had never held a gun. She handled spreadsheets, ledgers, risk assessments. Not this. "Take it," he said sharply. She reached out with trembling hands and took it. It was heavy, the metal cold and unforgiving against her palms. "There are 15 rounds in that magazine," Gabriel said, crouching down so he was at eye level with her. The harsh fluorescent light of the bunker cast deep shadows across the sharp angles of his face. "The safety is off. Do not put your finger on the trigger until you are ready to destroy whatever is in front of you." "Gabriel!" He didn't let her finish. "I am going to lock this door from the outside. The only way it opens is with my fingerprint. If Richard Hayes gets through my men, gets through me, and figures out how to cut through 6 inches of hardened steel, that door will open." He reached out, his hand cupping the side of her face. His thumb brushed over the bruised skin on her cheekbone. The touch was entirely at odds with the violent reality surrounding them. "If that door opens, and the face on the other side is not mine," Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper, "you raise this gun. You point it at the center of their chest, and you pull the trigger until the gun stops making noise. Do you understand me? Chloe looked into his dark eyes. She saw the absolute certainty of violence in them, but she also saw something else. He wasn't leaving her down here to discard her. He was leaving her down here to protect his only blind spot. I understand, she said. Her voice didn't shake. Gabriel's jaw tightened. He pulled his hand away, stood up, and stepped backward into the hallway. Don't let him find you, Gabriel said. The echo of her own words from 3 nights ago hung in the air. He pulled the heavy vault door shut. The locks engaged with a massive, final clank. Chloe was alone in the quiet. The silence inside the bunker was absolute, pressing against her eardrums until they rang. Chloe sat on the edge of the cot, both hands gripping the pistol. Her knuckles were white. She stared at the brushed steel of the vault door. 10 minutes passed, or maybe it was an hour. Time distorted in the windowless box. Then she felt it before she heard it. A deep seismic shudder vibrated up through the concrete floor, rattling her teeth. A second later, a muffled, concussive thud reached her ears. The C4. They had breached the main floor. The fluorescent light overhead flickered, buzzed angrily, and died. Total darkness swallowed the room. Chloe gasped, her finger flinching against the trigger guard. A second later, a dull red emergency light flicked on in the corner, casting the concrete room in a bloody, sinister glow. Upstairs, a war had started. She couldn't hear the individual gunshots, but she could hear the rhythmic, hammering vibrations through the ceiling. The building was a drum, and men were beating on it with automatic weapons. She imagined Gabriel moving through the smoke-filled hallways, calculating, cold, lethal. She imagined Dominic holding a choke point, his flat nose crinkled in concentration. She squeezed her eyes shut. She was an accountant, a normal woman who liked her coffee black and her apartment quiet. Now she was sitting in a subterranean box, holding a loaded weapon, waiting to see if she was a widow to a man she had never even kissed. The vibration stopped. The sudden cessation of violence was worse than the noise. The heavy, suffocating silence returned, heavier this time. Who won? She stared at the steel door. Her breath formed faint, ragged plumes in the cool air of the bunker. Clack! A metallic sound echoed from the hallway outside. Footsteps. Slow, dragging footsteps on the concrete stairs. Chloe stood up. She raised the gun, holding it with both hands, aiming squarely at the center of the vault door. Her heart hammered against her bruised ribs so violently she thought it might break them all over again. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. A heavy hand slapped against the steel. Then a wet, rattling cough. Chloe. The voice was muffled by 6 inches of steel, but she would know it anywhere. The slick, arrogant tenor was gone, replaced by a wet, bubbling rasp. But it was Richard. She didn't speak. She stopped breathing entirely. I know you're in there. Richard coughed. I found his office, found the elevator shaft. His men, they fought hard, but C4 doesn't care how tough you are. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes. Gabriel. If Richard was down here, that meant Gabriel had fallen. The man who had carefully sutured his own arm. The man who had locked the doors to keep the wolves out. Costa is dead! Richard panted, confirming her worst fear. The words were a physical blow, stealing the air from the room. He thought he was a king. Kings bleed just like everyone else. It's just you and me now, sweetheart. Chloe's grip on the gun tightened until her joints ached. She didn't cry. A strange, glacial calm washed over her. The terrified girl who had run through the freezing rain 3 nights ago died in that moment. What replaced her was hollow, cold, and immensely angry. She heard a scraping sound outside the door, a heavy hiss of gas. He locked you in good, Richard muttered. But I brought a cutting torch from his own garage. Might take me 10 minutes, might take me 20, but I'm coming in. A brilliant, blinding white spark erupted from the edge of the doorframe, visible even through the hairline gap in the seal. The smell of ozone and burning metal began to filter into the bunker. Chloe didn't lower the gun. She locked her elbows. The red emergency light bathed the room in shadows as the shower of sparks outside the door grew more intense. The steel began to glow a dull, angry orange at the hinges. Richard wasn't trying to pick the lock. He was melting the structural integrity of the frame itself. "You ruined me, Chloe!" Richard yelled over the hiss of the torch. He sounded delirious. "The cartel took my house. They took my accounts. I have nothing left, so neither do you. We're going to end this right here." The metal groaned. The orange spot spread, turning white-hot in the center. 10 minutes, she whispered to herself. She didn't back away. She took a step closer to the door. If this was the end, she wasn't going to cower on the cot. She was going to look him in the eye. The heavy hinges gave way with a sickening metallic shriek. The top lock held, but the bottom of the door buckled inward. A heavy boot kicked the glowing metal. Once. Twice. The vault door surrendered, swinging inward with a terrible groan, scraping against the concrete floor. The hallway light spilled into the red bunker, bringing with it a thick cloud of acrid smoke and the overwhelming stench of copper and burnt hair. Through the haze, a figure stepped into the doorway. He was a nightmare. Richard's expensive suit was shredded, soaked dark with his own blood. Half his face was covered in grey drywall dust, turning his features into a ghastly mask. He held the heavy cutting torch in his left hand, the flame extinguished, and a silver revolver in his right. He looked at her. He looked at the gun in her hands. He smiled. It was a ruinous, broken thing. "Look at you!" Richard rasped, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "Playing the gangster's wife! Did you really think you could pull a trigger?" Chloe stared at the center of his chest, exactly where Gabriel had told her to look. The safety was off. The weight of the trigger rested against her index finger. "Put the gun down, Chloe," Richard said, taking a slow, dragging step into the room. He raised the revolver, pointing it at her face. "I'll make it quick, I promise." She didn't lower her weapon. "You shouldn't have found me," Chloe whispered. She pulled the trigger. The gunshot inside the concrete box was apocalyptic. The recoil kicked hard against Chloe's wrists, sending a shockwave of pain through her bruised ribs. But she kept her eyes open. The bullet caught Richard high in the right shoulder. The impact spun him backward, tearing a chunk of fabric and flesh away. He screamed, dropping the revolver, the heavy gun clattering uselessly against the concrete floor. He stumbled into the doorframe, clutching his shattered shoulder, his eyes wide with absolute shock. He couldn't believe the mouse had bitten him. Chloe racked the slide mentally. "No, it's a semi-automatic. Just pull again." She realigned the sights on the center of his chest. Her hands were shaking violently now, the adrenaline spiking so hard her vision blurred at the edges. "You bitch!" Richard spat, sliding down the doorframe until he was on his knees. Blood pooled rapidly around his slacks. He glared at her with pure, undiluted hatred. "Do it! Kill me!" Chloe's finger tightened on the trigger. This was it. One more pound of pressure, and the monster who had kept her in a cage, who had hunted her through the streets, would be gone. She stared into his eyes, looking for any remorse, any hesitation. There was none. She took a breath. The cordite burned her lungs. Suddenly, a shadow detached itself from the smoke in the hallway behind Richard. Silent, predatory. Gabriel stepped into the light. He looked like he had walked through a meat grinder. His face was streaked with soot and blood. The white shirt he had put on earlier was ruined, torn at the shoulder, revealing a fresh, bloody graze. But his eyes were clear, dark, and utterly focused. He held his pistol casually at his side. Richard didn't hear him. He was too busy staring down the barrel of Chloe's gun. Gabriel stepped over the threshold, moving right behind Richard. He didn't say a word. He didn't gloat. He simply raised his gun, placed the barrel an inch behind Richard's ear, and pulled the trigger. The sound was sharp, definitive. Richard's head snapped forward, and he collapsed onto the concrete floor, entirely lifeless. The silence that followed was heavy, ringing in Chloe's ears. The air was thick with smoke, blood, and the finality of death. Chloe stood frozen, her gun still raised, pointing at the empty space where Richard's chest had been a second ago. She couldn't process what had just happened. Richard had said Gabriel was dead. She had believed him. She had mourned a man she didn't know because he was the only thing standing between her and hell. And now here he was, breathing, bleeding, alive. "Drop it," Gabriel said softly. Chloe's fingers went numb. The gun slipped from her grasp, hitting the floor with a heavy thud. Her knees finally buckled. Gabriel caught her before she hit the ground. He tossed his own weapon aside and wrapped his good arm around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. He smelled like gunpowder, smoke, and old copper. It was the best thing she had ever smelled. She buried her face into his chest, her hands fisting in his ruined shirt. A sob tore its way out of her throat. Not out of sadness, but out of pure, overwhelming release. The rubber band had finally snapped. Gabriel held her tight, his hand stroking the back of her head, pressing her into him. "I thought you were dead," she choked out against his chest. "He said you were dead." "I am a very difficult man to kill," Gabriel murmured, resting his chin on the top of her head. He was breathing hard, the adrenaline slowly leaving his own system. "He went through the lobby. I went through the walls. He found an empty elevator shaft. I found a flanking position. He was loud. I was quiet." They stood there in the doorway of the bunker, ignoring the body of the man who had brought them together, the smoke clearing slowly around them. "Are your men—" Chloe asked, pulling back slightly to look at his face. Dominic took a round to the leg. "He'll live. 3 others didn't make it," Gabriel said. His voice was stoic, but there was a heavy darkness in his eyes. He calculated the cost of everything. Tonight had been expensive. He looked down at Richard's body, then back to Chloe. "You shot him," Gabriel stated. It wasn't a question. "He was going to kill me," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Gabriel lifted his hand, his thumb wiping a smudge of soot from her cheek. "You didn't hesitate. You told me not to." A faint, grim smile touched Gabriel's lips. "So I did." He pulled away, stepping back into the hallway. "The police will be here in less than 5 minutes. The cartel cleaners are already on their way to handle the bodies. We need to go." Chloe looked back into the red-lit bunker. Her cage. "Go where?" she asked. "Upstairs," Gabriel said. "We have a mess to clean up, and Richard's ledger still needs to be fully liquidated." He held out his hand. Chloe looked at his large, calloused, blood-stained hand. If she took it, she wasn't just escaping Richard Hayes. She was accepting a new reality. She was stepping out of the civilian world entirely and anchoring herself to a warlord. She would live in the shadows. She would deal in secrets. She looked back at the ruined vault door. Then she reached out and placed her hand in his. His grip was warm, firm, and uncompromising. Gabriel pulled her close to his side, shielding her from the wreckage of the hallway as they walked past the bodies and the ruin of his fortress. "You're safe now," Gabriel said quietly as they climbed the stairs out of the darkness. Chloe squeezed his hand, the smell of smoke clinging to her clothes. "I know," she whispered. The rain had finally stopped, but in Gabriel Costa's city, the real work was just beginning. Thank you for listening to this story. If Chloe's transformation and her intense, high-stakes bond with Gabriel kept you hooked until the very end, please hit that like button. Share this video with a friend who loves dark, gritty romance and unrelenting drama. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you don't miss our next gripping audio drama. Let me know in the comments. Do you think Chloe made the right choice taking Gabriel's hand at the end? See you in the next one.